Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 82 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening. Janir swallowed and forced herself to focus. It was the Lord Argetallam's place to hear disputes, but today he had delegated the task. After a year in Adasha, the city of the Argetallams, her responsibilities as crown princess had gradually increased. It was all part of her bargain to be a proper heir. In exchange, he wouldn't harm those she loved back in Brevia. There was Armandius Caerson, her foster father, Gwenna Reladaman, the noblewoman he loved, Luana and Velasquez Camlin, Carail Kerwin, her best friend, and Seovan. Cerilius and Canicade hadn't moved from their posts at her side for more than an hour. The marble hall ended in two massive doors. On either one was the royal seal of the Argetallam house, a hawk with a serpent in its beak. Incense filled the room with a sweet, smoky scent that Janir had come to associate with long hours pretending not to scream inside her head. 3 men waited before her. One was young, not yet past his mid-20s, and she might have labeled him gallant if she hadn't spent 4 days hearing the accusations against him. The second was the youth's older brother, stern and annoyed. The third was the senior of the two by 20 years at least. The elder's face was wrinkled, and scarcely without a scowl since first entering the chamber. A little to the side sat a girl who couldn't have been more than a year older than Janir, if she was older at all. Her small hands were folded across her growing womb, and her head bowed. Janir bit her lip. If there was one good thing about her status, it was the power. Janir raised her voice, cutting off the eldest of the men. He went silent instantly. After 4 days, I can summarize the situation in a few sentences. Janir skimmed one finger along the armrest of her marble throne. Morton Caerder, she motioned to the youngest of the 3 men. You bought this girl 2 years ago as a concubine. Janir had to refer to her as this girl. In 4 days, not one of them had referred to the slave by name. Just 4 days ago, the youth had kept flashing her a look that was probably meant to be charming. Now his face was perfectly straight and more than a little impatient. Yes, Morton Caerder nodded. Janir gestured to the elderly of the 3 men. You then tired of her and sold her to Morsan Luciardos. Luciardos nodded. But she was already... Janir raised her hand. When you discovered she was already with child, you, Morton Luciardos, returned to Morton Caerder and demanded he take her back. Yes, but... Silence! Janir snapped. Morton Caerder. You then refused, saying the child was not yours. Yes, that's why I sold her. Shut up! It was not the most regal or royal thing to say, but no one who had seen that girl cower and grovel for hours on end could believe a word he said. When silence once again reigned, she turned to the 3rd man. Morton Salos, your brother claims the child isn't his, but you disagree? Morton Salos hesitated a moment. While the girl was in his possession, my brother never mentioned her playing the whore. He only discussed that he wished to replace her. Replace, as one would an old horse or pair of boots. There were moments Janir thought she could spit in the face of every Argetallam in the city, except perhaps Cerilius and Canicade. Not Lucan. Morton Caerder, you still believe this girl was with others besides yourself? Morton Caerder hesitated a moment. She's always had a wandering eye, milady. The gardener, the butcher's boy. I see. Janir took a deep breath before speaking again. I can tell you now that the child is Argetallam. Janir could feel an Argetallam's presence when she looked at the girl, and Argetallams dealt in slaves, but not in one another. Unless you wish to accuse one of your brethren of claiming your concubine, I suggest you tell me the truth. Morton Carter shifted, but didn't recant. Morton Salos. Janir turned back to the brother. Thus far, he was the least repulsive of the three. I understand you wish to take responsibility for your brother's child. Am I right? Morton Salos nodded. If he will not guard our bloodline. It's not mine, Morton Carter exclaimed. I don't care what happens to the wench. I'll keep her if you want. I just want my coin back, Morton Luciardos exclaimed. Janir thrummed her fingers on the armrest of the throne. She guessed Carter hadn't known the girl was carrying when he sold her. Now it seemed that he didn't want her back after she'd been another man's mistress. According to Argetallam law, if an Argetallam knowingly abandoned their offspring, they were stripped of line. In the recordings of bloodline, the natural Argetallam parent wouldn't be listed. Instead, their child would be considered a descendant of the one who raised them. That would not have been such a feared and terrible thing, but the second part of the law stated that not only would that one child be listed in another bloodline, but any children that the Argetallam might have after that would also belong to another ancestry, sometimes the same, sometimes different. It was the penultimate punishment, usually saved for traitors and oath-breakers. Morton Carter fit the crimes to be stripped of line, and there was part of Janir that was eager to dole out punishment. But she had more important things to consider, namely the girl and the unborn Argetallam. Janir rose and winced. She hadn't realized how her muscles had cramped. I will give you my judgment in 2 hours. Please refresh yourselves in the wine room. Janir motioned toward a latticed door situated behind a pillar. The girl rose to her feet to follow the 3 men, head still bowed. Not you, Janir said. The girl cringed as though she'd been struck. Janir turned to Canacade. Would you escort the girl to my chambers, Morton Canacade? Canacade was normally a trickster, but here, acting in the official capacity, he was a picture of gravity. Yes, m'lady. He bowed to his princess. Followed by Cerilius, Janir gathered the skirt of her gown and exited. While her father wore a black tunic emblazoned with the royal seal at judgment, Janir had been given a gown the color of ink, with matching lace overlay and long, bell-shaped sleeves. It was beautiful, if brutal in the desert climate. As soon as she made it out of the judgment room, Janir heaved a sigh. Pressing one hand against the wall, she closed her eyes and concentrated on trying to breathe away the weight pressing down on the back of her head. Are you all right? Cerilius hovered 2 steps back. I'll be fine, Janir groaned, not moving. Cerilius waited for a moment. You're doing well. Janir let off a chirp of laughter. Thank you. Will my father agree? Cerilius didn't reply. She could feel his presence at her back, a steady, glowing source of invulnerable power. She knew who was Argetallam and who was not. Part of the power of the ruling Argetallam and their heir. Yet ever since coming to Adasha a year ago, the power had increased. Now she no longer had to look at a person to know if they were invulnerable or not. Now she simply felt when one was close. It had frightened her at first, and still did at times. Janir felt a familiar presence nearing. Though she didn't know the lad's name, she recognized him from the times she had attended her father at court. She straightened. It was a mere moment before the boy, in his early teens, breathlessly rounded the corner and rushed to bow. "M'lady," the youth panted. "The Lord Argetallam summons you." Janir frowned. "Is something wrong?" "I only know that his lordship sent for you." Janir had hoped to resolve her judgment in time to take Kolbo, her prize stallion, for a gallop down the beach before she was stuffed into the dining hall for supper. "Tell him I'm on my way." She hid her disappointment behind a year's practice. The boy nodded and raced away back in the direction he had come. Janir gathered up her skirts and strode after him. Cerilius followed. Her gown billowed, flowing like liquid onyx. Practicality aside, she loved the cut and style of the dress. She just wished it could have been a cheerier color, perhaps blue or green. The principal reception room's sole purpose was to impress foreign emissaries and ambassadors. Massive pillars supported the ceiling, stretching hundreds of sword lengths into the sky. Light spilled over the marble from the glass windows high above. According to legend, it had taken 100 dwarf workmen to build the skylight, and another 200 to put it in place. Dozens of steps led up to the massive throne of the presiding Argetallam. People hushed. People hustled into the room, murmuring amongst themselves. Some wore formal garments as she did, while others were clad in their common clothes. Those in their common garb hung back, letting the better dressed take the front. The Lord Argetallam spotted Janir as she entered through one of the side passages and gestured for her to come closer. Swallowing, Janir ascended the steps to stand before her father, stopped several paces before the throne, and bowed. Ceruleus copied the gesture, though he stooped much lower. As the Lord Argetallam's heir, Janir was not required to bow, but it pleased her father. If it pleased the Lord Argetallam, she would grovel and scrape before him as needed to keep him from hurting anyone in Brevia. The Lord Argetallam beckoned. "Stand beside me." Janir took up a place at his left. Ceruleus posted himself a little behind her, and Drusilla, in the full battle wear of an Argetallam Mortana, stood on her other side. If Drusilla had been an animal, she would have been a desert cat. Her athletic build, sensual features, and ferocity as a fighter made her a picture of lethal beauty. Janir wanted to ask Drusilla or her father what was happening, but didn't get the chance. At the entrance to the reception chamber, heralds thumped their spear shafts against the ground. Silence descended. The hush prevailed as people waited, some holding their breath. The herald's voice filled the room like a battle horn. "The emissary of the Sylvan Forests, Seovan Camlin." Janir thought she had gone mad. Had she heard right? A mixture of emotions exploded inside her chest. It was as if her heart didn't know whether to leap or sink, and the result was a churning sensation in her breast. She was thrilled at the idea of seeing him again. More than thrilled. But if he was here, that meant he was in danger. This was why the Lord Argetallam had summoned her? Did he want to see her reaction? Or was she overthinking, and had he called for her because he had called for everyone else? Janir tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She was aware of Ceruleus arching his eyebrow ever so slightly, but ignored him. The doors opened and revealed two figures. They were travel-worn and stained, but still advanced into the heart of the Argetallam palace with confidence. Seovan was on the left. He and the other man must have just arrived. Nonetheless, Seovan moved with purpose, focused on the Lord Argetallam's throne. Janir kept staring at Seovan. Why wouldn't he look at her? No, she should be trying to find a way to get him out of here. It wasn't until Seovan and the other man bowed that she recognized the other figure. The large, gaping robe had been replaced by a more respectable-looking, if a bit long, tunic and breeches. He must have sprouted a good 8 inches since they had last met, but what had Carlisle been eating? She stared at her friend until her gaze was drawn back to Seovan. When he was in the room, it was hard to look at anyone else. Oh, by all the essences, she had forgotten how he made her knees weak and her pulse thready. "Lord Argetallam." How could Seovan address a man with such poise when, barely a year ago, his throat had nearly been slashed by the same person? "I come in peace, as an emissary from the Sylvan Forests. This is my companion, Carlisle Kerwin." The Lord Argetallam was quiet for a moment, contemplative. "Kerwin, you say?" "Yes, my lord." Carlisle's voice had lowered by 2 octaves. How could he be so changed in so little time? "Why are you here?" The Lord Argetallam tilted his head to the other side. He seemed only interested, though appearances hardly mattered. The only emotion the Lord Argetallam let show was anger. Why wouldn't Seovan look at her? She should have been concerned with why he was here, but all she could think about was that he was ignoring her. Not even Carlisle looked her way. "It has been brought to the attention of myself and several others that you may have had dealings with a member of our race who may have foul intentions. Seovan could have just as easily been giving instructions on how to string a bow. Toward whom? Me. The Lord Argetallam cast Janir a sideways glance. He knew Seovan loved her, knew that their bond was strong enough to break through weeks of torture and 8 years of stolen memories, knew that Seovan would die for her, or would have a year ago. Toward your race, my lord. Whispers were exchanged among the Argetallam Mortons and Mortanas. The Lord Argetallam's fingers thrummed lightly on his armrest. Everyone remained quiet, waiting for their lord to reply. Like everyone else, Seovan's attention didn't leave the Lord Argetallam. Janir couldn't help but think about the last time they had met. All those sweet words, tender caresses, and whispered promises. Finally, the ruler of the Invulnerables spoke. I would very much like to hear your warning, Seovan Camlin. He addressed the elf as though they had never met. I invite you to stay as my guest, for as long as need be, and allow us to discuss this. Seovan bowed, and Carlyle took the cue. We are honored, my lord. Janir swallowed a hard lump. It must be agonizing for Seovan to act the courteous dignitary before the man who had ordered him tortured. Put our guests up in the finest rooms, and see them looked after. An orderly in the uniform of a palace servant bowed, nearly to the ground. Yes, my lord. Janir watched the two of them go, dead inside. Milady? Cerilius touched her shoulder. Everyone else in the room had begun to disband, and her father stared at her. Janir squeezed between Argetallam Mortons and Mortanas, with Cerilius close behind, retreating to her rooms. Janir had work to do, and the fate of a mother and child to decide. She fairly ran back to her chambers, but Cerilius said nothing. It was one of the things that made him invaluable as a companion. He knew when she craved silence. Why were Seovan and Carlyle here? Would her father let them leave? How would she get them to leave? Janir flung the door open to her apartments and rushed in despite Cerilius's many warnings that she should always allow him to enter a room first. But it was her personal chambers, and Canacade was already standing guard with the slave girl. What danger was there? Janir's rooms reflected all the importance and power of her position. A gold-framed looking-glass stretched along the upper portion of the wall. Beneath it ran a small, narrow table, inlaid with enamel patterns that must have taken months to piece together. A fireplace dominated one corner. The limestone hearth was smudged with soot, but swept clean. In the center of the room was Janir's favorite piece of furniture, a circular couch that was divided in half by a curved barrier, so that the two halves were the shape of 2 raindrops, twisting around one another. It was her favorite place to lounge in the evenings, while Cerilius sat on the other side and helped her in her studies. In Argetallam history, military strategy, or whatever subject her father had decided to shove down her throat that day. Canacade had tried to help, but often just ended up confusing her. After a while, he stopped trying and left the two of them alone in the evenings while he... Janir had no idea what Canacade did in the evenings, but he always seemed eager to go. On second thought, she had several ideas. A light meal had been laid out on a low table beside the airy window overlooking a view of the gardens. The tea steamed, and the figs and dates were laid out alongside the cheeses. Canacade looked up when Janir entered, but the slave girl didn't. She just stood there with her head down, hair falling in her face, clasping her belly. You are dismissed, Janir said to Canacade and Cerilius. I'll call for you if I need you. The two stepped into the alcove just outside her door, where the servants had prepared a meal for her bodyguards. Taking a deep breath, Janir crossed the room and took a seat on one of the large cushions that served as chairs in the Staspin waist. The slave girl's wide brown eyes followed her every move. It's all right, Janir assured her. Come and sit. The girl blinked. Please, sit. I only want to speak with you. Janir indicated the cushion across the table. The slave did as she was asked, and lowered herself into the silk cushion, and lowered herself onto the silk cushion. Janir poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to the servant. The Argetallam's every move seemed to confuse the girl even more, but she accepted the drink. "What's your name?" The girl frowned. "Madia, m'lady." She ducked her head. "Madia, please don't be afraid of me. I just wish to speak with you." Madia swallowed and nodded, keeping her eyes angled downwards. "Now," Janir didn't want this to come off as an interrogation. "Is the child Cairdur's?" Janir measured several figs and dates onto a plate and handed it to the slave. Madia took it without questions this time, but didn't make to touch the morsels. "Yes." Madia ducked her head as though ashamed. What had been done to this girl that she felt shame in her every movement? Janir rested one hand on Madia's shoulder. "Shh. It's all right. I thought as much." Madia didn't lurch at Janir's hand as the Argetallam had feared. She sniffled and swallowed, straightening her face. "Madia, by Argetallam law, I have 3 choices. I think I know which one is best, but I wanted to make sure it was the one you wanted, too." Madia nodded. Janir withdrew her hand from the slave's shoulder and took a deep breath. "The first option is that I order Cairdur to return the money to Luciardo's and take you back." The brief shiver that went over the girl did not escape Janir's eye. "I could order Luciardo's to keep you and name him a troublemaker. Or I can name Cairdur the guilty party, strip him of line, and place you in the care of his brother. Would you be all right with that?" Madia made eye contact for the first time. She nodded. "Yes, m'lady," she meekly replied. Janir tilted her head to one side. "Has Selos been unkind to you?" Madia shook her head. "No, it's just that—" She trailed off. "What?" Janir asked. "Madia?" Madia simply shook her head again. "Madia, do you know something about Selos that I do not?" Madia stared down at her hands, not speaking. Janir breathed a deep sigh. "If there's anything I should know, I need to know it now." "It's just that—" Madia took a shuddering breath. "It's just that they live in the same estate." Janir took a deep breath. It wasn't uncommon for Argetallam siblings to share an estate. In a society that didn't practice marriage, the markers for when an individual should obtain their own estate were rather shady. Usually, brother and sister pairs lived together, with the sister overseeing the upbringing of her brother's children, and the brother acting as a parental figure to his sisters. But brothers sharing a household was not that uncommon in families where there was one or no sisters. Janir bit her lip as her mind wandered from brothers to Genvissa. The healer was kind and wise beyond her years, and one of the few in Adasha Janir would dare call a friend. Yet Janir was certain Lucan had taken Genvissa as a lover for some time now. Janir had offered to find Genvissa a post outside the palace, but Genvissa had pleaded with Janir not to. It wasn't that Lucan had shown any signs of misusing or hurting Genvissa. He was even faithful to her as far as Janir knew. But slaves who were the lovers of royals inherited all the danger and a quarter of the protections. Janir forced herself to focus on the dilemma at hand. If she stripped Cairdur of line, he would probably blame his brother. That would almost certainly drive a permanent rift between the two, and they would likely part ways. Though Janir had to consider the possible scenario that Cairdur would seek revenge on his brother and Madia. What was she supposed to do?
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.